So let's run through a bunch of verses first. So we'll go Genesis 39, 1 through 6. So what I'm going to do this morning with the verses is just kind of build you a picture of all the chaos that happened in Joseph's life to get him to the end of his life. So it says, now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of the Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge from his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in his house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. And then we're going to go to 39, 20 through 23. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those he held in prison, and he was made responsible for all that is done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him in success in whatever he did. Let's go to 41, 46 to 52. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced plentifully. Joseph collected all the food produced in those 7 years of abundance in Egypt and stored it in his cities. In each city, he put the food grown in the fields surrounding it. Joseph stored up huge quantities of grain like sand of the sea. It was so much that he stopped keeping records because it was beyond measure. Before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph by Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh and said, "It is because God has made me forget all my troubles in my father's household." The second son he named Ephraim and said, "It is because God had made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." Then if you go to 42, 21 and 22. They said to one another, "Surely we are being punished because our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That's why this distress has come upon us." Reuben replied, "Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must give an accounting for his blood." You can go down to 37. Then Reuben said to his father, "You may put both of your sons to death if I do not bring him back to you. Entrust him to my care, and will bring him back." Let's go to 43, 8 to 9. Then Judah said to Israel his father, "Send the boy along with me, and we will go at once, so that we and you and our children may live and not die. I myself will guarantee his safety. You can hold me personally responsible for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him here before you, I will bear the blame before you all of my life." Let's go to 44, 17 through 34. But Joseph said, "Far be it from me to do such a thing. Only the man who is found to have the cup will become my slave. The rest of you go back to your father in peace." When Judah went up to him and said, "Pardon your servant, my lord. Let me speak a word to my lord. Do not be angry with your servant, though you are equal to Pharaoh himself." My lord asked his servants, "Do you have a father or a brother?" And we answered, "We have an aged father, and there is a young son born to him in old age. His brother is dead, and he is the only one of his mother's sons left, and his father loves him." Then you said to your servants, "Bring him down to me so I can see him for myself." And we said to my lord, The boy cannot leave his father. If he leaves him, his father will die. But you told your servants, unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you will not see my face again. When we went back to your servant, my father, we told him what my lord had said. Then our father said, go back and buy a little more food. But we said, we cannot go down. Only if our youngest brother is with us will we go. We cannot see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us. Your servant, my father, said to us, you know that my wife bore me 2 sons. One of them went away from me. And I said, he has surely been torn to pieces, and I have not seen him since. If you take this one from me too, and harm comes to him, you will bring my gray head down in the grave of misery. So now if the boy is not with us when I go back to your servant, my father, and if my father, whose life is closely bound up with the boy's life, sees that the boy isn't there, he will die. Your servants will bring the gray head of our father down to the grave. Your servant guaranteed the boy's safety to my father, and I said, if I don't bring him back to you, I will bear the blame before you, my father, all my life. Now then, please let your servant remain here as my lord's slave in the place of the boy, and let the boy return to his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No, do not let me see the misery that would come to my father. Let's go to 45, 4 through 13. Then Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. When they had done so, and he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing or reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you and your children and your grandchildren, your flocks and your herds, and all that you have. I will provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute. You can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that it is really I who am speaking to you. Tell my father about the honor accorded to me in Egypt and everything you have seen, and bring your father down here quickly. And let's go 15 to 21. It's nice when people have Bibles. Does anybody know why? I know when everybody's done shuffling. I can hear it. When everybody's done, I know it's go time. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, what if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him? So they sent word to Joseph saying, your father left these instructions before he died. This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and wrongs they committed in treating you badly. Now, please forgive the sins of the servants of God and your father. And when the message came to him, Joseph wept. His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him. We are your slaves, they said. But Joseph said to them, do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish now what is being done, the saving of many lives. So then don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your family. And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. So I was just trying to build a picture for you real quick about some of the things that happened to Joseph, some of the mentalities of the brothers, how the brothers were thinking during these situations, just to give you little snapshots here and there. So let's go through this. How did this improve Joseph? All right, how did this improve Joseph? Because Joseph just said God meant it for good. So how did it go for good? Well, first of all, this humbled Joseph. You know, he was not the same kid that he was when he was in his father's house. He learned how to manage an estate and people little by little. All right, little by little, he got to do it. I saw, just in the last couple months, I watched a documentary on Warren Buffett. And they were talking to his secretary, and they said, how does he manage like having 15, 20 companies at a time that he's trying to rebuild or grow or whatever? And the secretary said, well, I just watched him do one. And then he learned how to do two. And then he learned how to manage three. And so having 15 now is nothing for him because he just learned little by little how to do it. And that's kind of happened what happened with Joseph also. He went from just being the administrator of an estate, and then he took care of a whole prison, and then all of a sudden he's taking care of the whole kingdom of Egypt and in some ways the entire world. He was able to learn and watch the social elite. So when he got in, because you remember, Potiphar was one of the social elite. He was, there's some translations that say he was the captain of the guard. There's other translations that say that he was Pharaoh's chief baker. But regardless, Joseph was going to be around of the socialites, the rich and the elite all of the time. So when he got into being the second in charge, he probably knew how to walk the walk and talk the talk. All right? He was one of those people, or at least he knew how to act like those people and know how the inner workings of all of this worked. And then he got sent to prison where Pharaoh's prisoners were kept. Okay, that's not a minor detail. He got sent to prison where all of Pharaoh's prisoners were kept, because that was going to be the way that he was going to get front face view and be able to talk to Pharaoh. All right, what are your guys' thoughts? How this process improves Joseph? Anything I missed? Or anything you'd like to add? Please go further.
Well, he evidently was a pretty proud little kid in his grade. He was treated pretty good in comparison, it seems, to his older brothers. And he learned how to be a little humble.
How do you think you would have handled it if you were a teenager getting prophetic messages from God? I kind of asked that as a rhetorical question, and half of you are laughing right now. How well would that have gone for you? You guys know me pretty well, a lot of you. You guys know I would have handled that horribly, right? I would have handled that with a lot of arrogance and pride. It would not have gone well. So I kind of look at Joseph, I'm like, yeah, I get it. Yeah, I get it. But then you think about how he handled himself later in life. Hopefully we're all becoming better Christians and more wise as we're getting older. And you see a much older, wiser Joseph than the younger Joseph. Anybody else? Yeah, go ahead.
I think he learned mercy.
Keep going.
Mercy and forgiveness. Because he could have destroyed it for others.
Yeah, he could have gotten it. Yeah, he had the power of payback, right? Yeah. Anybody else? Okay, let's talk about something that we don't talk about a lot. How did this process improve his brothers? Because this is an important part of this story too. Because remember, these are the forefathers. These are the 12 tribes that are going to get this nation rolling, right? So let's talk about them too. This also humbled them because they went from a position of power where they could sell Joseph to bowing in front of him multiple times and being afraid that he was going to kill them. I read the part of Judah. That's one of the most important parts of today. Judah went from, let's not kill him, let's sell him so we can at least make some money off of him, as they're sitting there eating lunch and their brother is crying in the well, to being worried about everybody else except himself when the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. I mean, you want to talk about a guy that did a 180? He did a 180. He went from total selfishness to total giving in a short period of time, right? In the span of so many years. They learned the consequences of their actions. This was eating at them for a long time. And you saw Reuben's reaction. He's like, we're getting our just due for what we did, right? I mean, this was just eating at them all this time. And they also learned, which is something that we are terrible at, They learned that forgiveness ends animosity, and they didn't need to hold on to their guilt. I'm going to say that again. There are a lot of people sitting in this room right now that have tons of guilt about sins that they've committed in the past that need to go away. Because they are forgiven. You have been forgiven. If they've repented and asked for forgiveness, right? But what normally happens is people repent, ask forgiveness, and then keep beating themselves up for it over and over again. Yeah, and forget it. Not that you shouldn't have learned from the sin and the disobedient behavior, but you're going to have to move on, or this stuff is going to eat at you over and over again. Now, I'm glad that you said that, because there are some situations where maybe you need to repent, or maybe you need to ask for forgiveness from somebody that you've wronged so you can end this animosity. Maybe that's where you're at today. Anybody else have any other thoughts?
The one word that goes through my mind with the brothers is vengeance. They were so afraid that, I mean, even though the thought and the word didn't come out in the scriptures, you could just feel it that what's he going to do to us? That's why I said vengeance is the word that comes through my mind.
Okay, so there's two different ways you can look at this, coming at it from two different directions. One is Joseph being the forgiver, right? And then the other side is what you're talking about, wanting to be the forgivee, right? Now, beautiful thing about being in a church body. What would you hope would happen if you go and ask one of your fellow brothers or sisters for forgiveness? That they would accept it. I don't know if we have a high opinion of each other enough. Because a lot of times we're afraid to go ask for forgiveness from one of our brothers and sisters. That should be something that we should be wanting to do and think that that's going to end well, right? It should end well. If you have two Christians that love each other and somebody did something wrong to the other one, that situation should be able to be rectified with a repentant heart. That should take care of the problem. And this is a perfect example of that. What did Joseph notice about his brothers? They were completely repentant. They admitted what they did wrong. At one point, it's a hilarious, neat little tidbit of the story. They start talking in Hebrew, and they think he's an Egyptian. And he's just listening to them talk about what's going on, and they think they're pulling one over on him, and they're yelling at each other about selling Joseph, and now they're getting their payback. And he's watching this whole thing going, okay, maybe their brains are in the right spot. But he tested them one more time. That's why he put that silver cup in Benjamin's sack. Were the brothers going to sell him out too? And once Judah gave that speech, that changed the whole tide. Changed the whole tide, right? Don't underestimate the ability of love, compassion, and repentance to change the tide of a relationship. And I'm just as bad as everybody else at this too. All right, I'm talking to myself right now also. Anybody else have any thoughts there? All right, some applicable lessons for us. We get stripped of things during our molding. Joseph got stripped of his beautiful coat. He got stripped of jobs. He got stripped of freedom. We've been stripped of things before. And some of that still, like we've been stripped of money, jobs, status, relationships. Sometimes that stuff happens when you get molded. Losing molds us into better people than winning does. As a coach, anytime that you win, this is a horrible part of being a coach. When you win, you immediately move on to the next game and you don't enjoy it. When you lose, you spend the whole next week, especially if you're a football coach, you got to wait a whole week. You spend the whole next week in angst and trying to fix all the problems that you have. But that being said, there's something good about that, because you only know what you stink at when you get beat over the head. And I'm the same way. All right, so I put two things up there. I'm gonna tell you two stories about my life. Number one, my parents are divorced. It was a horrible thing for my family, okay? It was a horrible thing for my family, for my parents to get divorced. It was a nasty divorce. None of it was good. None of it was good. That being said, it made me a better person. Now I look back on it because I'm a little bit less judgmental now. I can now talk to my kids at school about what it's like to be a divorced kid. So I've been through that ringer, and in some ways it's been better for me. Kristen and I, because Kristen comes from a divorced family also, there is no talk of ever divorce. From day one, we were like, we're just not getting divorced, so we better figure this out, right? So it made us better, because we're not going through or putting our kids through what we were put through. So that's what I'm talking about the molding, right? And then the other part is this, I'm just gonna kind of give you a sillier example. I become the head strength coach at Wyoming High School through my business, and I take over there. They had won the regional championship, or went to the regional championship and lost the year before. They hired me because Wyoming High School kind of wanted to go to another level, and they wanted to try to start winning the state championship. So they wanted to bring someone on the outside to help. So I only have like 3 or 4 months with the football team before they play. We're 12-0. We go into the regional finals against Clinton Massey. Clinton Massey is always one of the best football programs in the state of Ohio. And I walk out in the field, and I see how much bigger and stronger they are than us, and I just went, oh no. And we got hammered. Almost every one of the Wyoming coaches, as they walked off the field, looked at me and said, we got to get bigger and stronger. Trust me, they didn't have to tell me. I knew before the game started. I did a ton of research. I talked to everybody that I could. We got way bigger and stronger the next year. We went 15-0, won the state championship. And I don't know if we would have won it if we wouldn't have taken the beating the year before. And it has changed how I train kids from then on out. And that was what, like 5 years ago, 4 years ago? And that has led to more success moving forward because we got beat so bad. And we got beat really bad. All right? For a team that was 12-0, we got beat really bad. Your detours lead to your destiny, and it's never a straight line. Everybody thinks, well, I'm just going to do this and this and this and this and this, and I'm going to get there, and everything's going to be good. And we know that's not how it goes, right? It's like this. Sometimes you turn around for a little bit, and then you got to start over again. It's never pretty. And Joseph's life is an example of that. It's never pretty. It's always kind of messy as it goes. But why wasn't it messier? Because he was so obedient. There's a famous psychologist named Jordan Peterson who makes the statement all the time. He says, don't underestimate your ability to make a bad situation worse. All right? And I think that's hilarious. And I think about that all the time. So I'm thinking, man, this is chaos right now. But what if I said something stupid? Then it could make it worse. Yes, sir?
There's an old saying, if you're going to make a mistake, make a big one. So you learn from that and you won't make...
And hopefully you can recover from it, right?
Hopefully you won't make a bigger mistake. Been there.
Yes, sir.
I think the answer always is to bring God into it, ask for his guidance.
Yeah. That'll keep you from making some of those big mistakes, huh? Yeah. Next one, and this is all what Kevin's been talking about all Sunday morning. Use your talents to help others. And we all have different talents in this room. All right, I think about Glenda Neff. He actually made the comment last week that Glenda Neff is great at doing administrative and logistical type things. And when he started talking about that, that brought a smile to my face, because the first year that we did Kumo Thanksgiving, and hopefully we'll eventually be able to get that going on a really high level again, we had no idea what we were getting ourselves into. All right, but it was, and I joked with people, they said, well, how'd you get all that organized? I said, well, I just told Christians what we needed and they did it. It wasn't as complicated as I thought it was gonna be. Well, Glenda Neff comes up to me, and I don't care about these details that I'm about ready to tell you. Glenda Neff says, I'm going to make sure all the tables look nice. And I was thinking to myself, I'm worried that we just won't have enough food, right? I don't really, at first I was like, I don't care about, but if she wants to do that, let her do it. She came and she made all of the tables look perfect. She made them all different colors. She put centerpieces on there. She made sure that all the silverware and everything was lined up right. And when people walked into the gym, they went, oh, this is a real deal thing. And all of a sudden, I cared about those details a lot more the next couple of years because Glenda made the place look beautiful. I was just worried that we were going to have enough food. She made it special, right? So she just used something that I didn't even think was that important at the time and made it amazing, right? So that's what I'm talking about with all these different talents. People have different talents. There's no indication that Joseph was ever angry with God. I'm going to challenge some of you right now. I don't think it's ever okay for you to be angry with God. And I know some of you are going to disagree with me on that. When I was going through my notes again this morning, I thought, well, if I upset anybody today, it's going to be with this statement. I don't think it's ever okay for you to be angry with God. You know why? Because that means you're right. And you think you know what his plan is for you. And I don't think that's true. Anybody have any comments on that? I would love to hear if you would like to argue against me on that, because trust me, it's not like I've completely wrapped my head around this concept. Yes, Tim?
I would just change it 1 degree.
Go.
It's not okay to remain angry with God. You've got to sort through that.
Talk further about it. Explain that more.
Anger is an emotion that comes when it comes, and to deny that it's there is being dishonest with God. But not working through and remaining angry with God is a recipe for destruction.
So you're saying like it's okay to have a visceral reaction and be upset about something, but then understand why it happened later and come to the grips with it? That's a way better explanation than mine. Anybody else? Yeah.
I think it is okay to show God how angry you are about things. Not everything in our life is going to go well. I've lost 2 children and a husband. And there was times I was angry, but I wasn't angry at God, but I was angry that I lost my loved ones. And he wants to hear everything, you know, our good things and our bad things. And it's okay to tell him about the bad things and what we're struggling with.
Yeah, no, I would say that to those points, it's your heart condition when you come to him with those too. Is that fair, Marla? Is that fair? Your heart condition never changed towards God when I watched you go through some of this stuff. And that's a great example for all of us.
I always think of Job, and he didn't blame God. Yeah, that was the key. He didn't blame or turn up God on all the things that God allowed to happen to him.
Yeah, and then God looked at him and said, where were you guys when I created the heavens and the earth? And where were you when I created the Leviathan? And I mean, what a statement.
Just kept his mouth shut. He didn't say a word. He couldn't say a word.
Yeah, Job knew that God wasn't looking for an answer. Anybody else? Thank you for those comments. Yeah.
Joseph is a great example for someone who maintained his faith in God, kept a connection with God. You can go through bad experiences, and you have to allow those good things to come forward. Because some people come out of bad experiences angry and can't get over the anger, and they act out, and their lives become more miserable, but they don't know how to turn it around.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
Now,
It goes back to heart condition, right? Again.
You know, I'm struggling with this a little bit because I'm looking at it. Sometimes when people talk about being mad at God, I can remember after my heart attack, I was not mad at God, but I was upset at God because I wanted him to let me die. If that makes any sense. I was so miserable and in so much pain and anguish, I didn't want to live. And I prayed for death. And so I wasn't mad at him, but I was upset. Now, 10 years later, hey, good deal. But
You're sure glad he didn't listen to you.
But I have watched a lot of people that are, I've talked to people that in the hospital that are upset. And sometimes, I don't know if it's anger, there's just, Marlene mentioned, or you're upset about it. And then my comments, when I get back to that discussion is, because of my life, why did this happen to you? What's God's purpose for this and happening with you? And then we'll go into a discussion of how they've been blessed by the illness or the struggle they went through. We find someone where they got stronger, some family relationship got stronger. So I try to build upon it with them. And that's where, if we get so angry and we turn from God, then we don't do it.
I guess I'm gonna hold it out further.
Party in the water. Wait.
I bent down, drop that, mess it all up. Yeah, anybody else have any thoughts there?
I think sometimes we forget that we're not owed anything. I mean, we think because, oh, I do this right, I do that right, we're owed something, but actually we're owed nothing. And so when bad things happen, they just happen. And ultimately, it's just about our faith and not about what happens on this earth, you know, because we truly, God owes us nothing. And I think as human beings, we lose sight of that, and that's why you would remain angry at God, because you think, you know, why did you let this happen to me? It becomes self-centered.
So when I was at Mark Menz's funeral, I reflected on that because I thought, I looked at two people that had a wonderful marriage, and I looked at that and I went, how would I feel if Kristen died tomorrow, right? And now there's a couple ways I could approach that. We're gonna have our 20th anniversary this summer, right? How awesome is that? And let's say one of us died tomorrow. We would have to, there's a couple ways we could approach it. We could approach it and go, God, why would you take her from me? I could also look at it in a different way. And I'm not saying this would be easy, and I'm not even saying that I would do this. But I could also look at him and say, I had an unbelievable wife for 19 years. There's some people that never have a wife. There are some people that have horrible wives. There's some people that only had their wives for a very short time. I had one for 19 years. Right? And I'm going to shake my fist at him now and say, why don't you do anything good for me? Right? Anybody else have any thoughts?
You don't really know what God's purpose is for you. And sometimes he does things you think are bad for you. And you need to thank him for the good and pray about it and go on. Because you may find out, as you were talking about a minute ago, you're all right. He has educated you and made you nearer and more like Jesus by what he's done.
Yeah. Yeah, Jeff.
I don't know how significant it is, but it's pretty interesting how the Bible shares the meaning of the names of his sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, and how he describes it as, Manasseh, for he said, God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house, again, being grateful to God. And then Ephraim, for God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. So there's fruitfulness and affliction in the same sentence in the name of his youngest son. It's just kind of interesting. I don't know the full significance, but Joseph never lost sight of God and God, the promise that God had made through Jacob had been passed down to his sons. He was always cognizant of God's presence in his life, and we see that in the story.
Yeah. Now, I'll tell you one thing that I think everybody should do. Bible classes are in a box, and they can only do so much for a short period of time, right? And I've heard the statement that the best teaching, if you're a teacher, should happen out in the hallways after class, right? If people are still talking about it and everything after class, then you did a good job. This thing about being angry with God, I think this is something from listening to your comments that everybody needs to ponder a little bit more. because it doesn't seem like everybody's completely wrapped their heads around it. And I told you I haven't either. So I think that's something that people should ponder, at least for the near future, and study a little bit and talk to people about, because it doesn't seem like everybody completely is okay with how to handle this situation. Now, the last one, one of my sons, he married a girl named Sarah, and Sarah's dad his name's John Crabb, and he studies his Bible constantly. So whenever he and I get together, all we do is just gab. It always starts the same way. One of us will look at the other one and go, "What have you been reading?" And then it just goes from there. And then for the next hour, we're just talking. Well, I'm sitting at the zoo with him because he went to the zoo. We took the grandbabies to the zoo. And I'm sitting with him while the rest of them got on the trolley. And I was like, "Hey, John, I got you for like 10 minutes, me and you. Hey, I'm going to teach a class on Joseph. What do you think?" Just to see what he's. And he said, "Adam, Joseph is a prescriptive story." I was like, "What are you talking about?" He said, "There are stories in the Bible that are descriptive, and there are stories in the Bible that are prescriptive." So, for example, a descriptive story is the story of Judah that gets thrown in there in the middle of the story of Joseph, about Judah and all of his sons and Tamar and how that bloodline went. That is a descriptive story. No one should ever act like that, all right? And there are descriptive stories in the Bible. I think Paul and Barnabas fighting and splitting is a descriptive story. I really don't like it when ministers get up there and start talking about how great it is that Paul and Barnabas split because they got into a big fight and two Christians split away from each other and stopped working with each other. I don't think that's a great message, to be honest with you. Now, did God use it for good? 100% he did, and it spread more. But that doesn't mean that their actions were great. All right, so those are descriptive stories. A prescriptive story is something that you would prescribe to somebody. And there are also a lot of those. All right, so sometimes you got to read these as prescriptive stories or descriptive stories, and we have to help people understand what's what, right? Joseph's story is a prescriptive story. This is how you should act on a daily basis. This is how your heart should be. This is what you should do when you get power. This is what you should do when you don't have power. There are so many prescriptions in there that are vitally important to our lives. Now let's talk about this. You talked about being changed by grace. You were ahead of me. Here we go. Number one, you should avoid God's chair. You should avoid God's chair. Do not believe you're always in control and that you are God. And it leaves the writings of wrongs to God. So I'm going to talk to you about kind of a controversial thing that we deal with in the schools these days. And I'm not saying this jokingly at all. In the Forest Hills School District, we are in suicide season. Every single year during this time frame, we have 1 or 2 suicides. Every single year. Okay? We are in suicide season. And at FCA the other day, the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, I do that at Anderson High School every Thursday morning. And we had a conversation with the kids about not being in God's chair, right? Like not knowing if somebody like Judas, while he was hanging there, was repenting to God and going, "Why did I do this?" Right? We don't know any of that stuff. So sometimes you just need to avoid God's chair. The next thing, take God's view. Everything's at work for a reason. We think we're the stars of all the shows that we're in, but sometimes remember that you might just be an extra. All right? Take the big picture view of things. All right? When you're at the top of the mountain, it's a lot easier to see than if you're in the valley. When you're in the valley, you just see the mountain, the bottom of the mountain. And see God's hand in men's malice. You're going to image God's love if you're a man saved by grace. It's unconditional. You're going to love your enemies. You're going to return evil deeds with forgiveness and affection. The whole concept in the Bible about overcoming evil with good is summed up in the most important story in our lives. What is it? What? Jesus dying on the cross. That's a horrible story. There were so many wrong things that so many people did to a man that didn't deserve any of it. And if it wouldn't have happened, I would not be going to heaven one of these days. Or at least have the chance to. Now, Jeff, whenever I teach classes, I always sit down with Jeff and I kind of have some informal conversations. I'm always like, how do you want this to look? What do you want me to do? I kind of run some things past him. You know, you always talk to somebody that's smarter than you. All right? He told me, he goes, I want these classes, the Patriarchs, to push towards Christ. And he looked at me and he goes, I don't know how much you're going to be able to do that, but just do it. Just do it. So I went and scoured the internet and I watched every sermon I could find on Joseph. All right? In the last 5 minutes of one of those sermons, Jeff, I found the mother lode for this. All right? So, what are the connections between Joseph and Christ? And this blew me away. This absolutely blew me away. And when you see the connections between these two, you're going to go, wow. All right, you guys ready? This is fun. He was dearly loved by his father and dearly loved by his mother. He got sent to Egypt for protection, right? Angel comes to Joseph in the middle of the night, says, you need to flee. They fled to Egypt. He ended up being a shepherd, and he was it figuratively and literally, right, in Joseph's case. He was hated by his half-brothers, right? It says that his brothers despised him. Jesus is the same way. But the relationship improved. And eventually, James became one of the leaders of the first century church, and him and Jude both wrote books of the Bible. They were both stripped of their clothes at one point. And they were sold for the price of a slave. So Joseph was literally sold as a slave, and Jesus was sold by Judas for the price of a slave. Uh-oh. He was betrayed by the people closest to him, right? By an apostle and by the actual brothers. Was marginalized even though he had special gifts. People still demeaned both of them. They were both tempted multiple times to sin. They were both falsely accused. They were bound in chains. They got condemned with other criminals. And they were both 30 years old when they began their public service. After they suffered, they were both highly exalted. They wept for their brothers and made sure that they were taken care of. They forgave those who handed them over into bondage. They saved their enemies. They saved anyone from any country that wanted saving. Think about that parallel. Joseph did not tell people that were coming in from all over the world that he wasn't going to help them. Anyone who wanted to come got saved. What men did to hurt them, God turned to good. They did not suffer for the sins that they committed, but for the sins of others. And the last one's the best one. Eventually, every knee bowed. And we're going to be the same way. Some of us have already bowed that are here, and we have given our Christ life over and said, you are the king. Hopefully some people in this audience will eventually do it. But it also says at the day of judgment, everyone's going to do it. Anybody have any final thoughts before we go?
Joseph was a precursor of Christ.
Was a precursor of Christ. And you see all the parallels, right? So some questions I'm going to leave you with. Number one should be, should you be angry with God? Right? Because that was the thing it seemed like everybody was struggling the most with. Can you think of a time when God refined you through a struggle? How have hard times refined you? Is there anything in your life that still needs to be refined? The answer to that is yes. Okay? Since the answer is yes, what actions or help are you looking to? And are you a person changed by grace? All right, let's bow before we finish up here. Dear God in heaven, thank you for great examples of people like Joseph that we can model our lives by. And thank you for the consistent themes of seeing that Joseph and Jesus had same purposes for you and your kingdom, and to save others and to bring others to you and to show what it is like to be saved by grace and to take care of all the people around us. Will you please be with us so we'll mimic the actions of Joseph and of Jesus, and then we'll be them and be just bright, shining examples of how you want us to be in this world. And just thank you for not only this knowledge that you've given us, but just the wonderful guidance you've given us every day of our lives. And in Jesus' name we pray, amen.